From 16 on, I supported myself. No help, no vacations, just hard work until I bought my house at 24. At a family barbecue, Mom shouted, "You ruined your brother's future." Days later, I was served. My parents were suing me. What came next was pure karma. I was 24 when I finally got the keys to my first home. A small, slightly run-down two-bedroom with chipped paint, a stubborn front gate that squeaked like it was alive, and a backyard that looked more like a jungle than a lawn. To anyone else, it was just another cheap starter house. But to me, it felt like the finish line after years of grinding with no breaks. I'd been taking care of myself since I was 16, working 2 jobs through high school, skipping every party, every summer trip, every lazy weekend my friends got to post about online. While they were off making memories, I was pulling night shifts at the gas station, restocking shelves until the early hours, trying to stay awake through the next morning's classes. I never took a dime from my parents. Not for rent, not for tuition, not even gas money. They didn't really offer, either, and eventually, I stopped expecting them to. I figured if I wanted any kind of future, I'd have to carve it out with my own 2 hands. Maybe it was naive, but I honestly thought they'd be proud. I wasn't looking for a big celebration, just a "hey, nice job, son." Instead, what I got was silence, and then the barbecue. The now legendary family barbecue. It was supposed to be a simple weekend thing. Burgers, beers, cousins catching up. I showed up early because my mom asked me to help set up tables, and I took that as a sign we might finally be past the weird distance that had settled between us since I moved out at 18. But the second I stepped into the backyard, it felt like walking into a pressure cooker. The first bad omen was my younger brother, Ryan, sprawled across a patio chair like he owned the place. He's 22, still living at home, doing absolutely nothing with his life. And for reasons I'll never understand, my parents treat him like he's made of crystal. He barely looked up when I walked in, gave me this smug half-smile, and went right back to scrolling his phone. I brushed it off and started hauling chairs into the yard. Half an hour later, everyone had arrived, drinks in hand, laughter filling the air, when Mom clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "Everyone," she said, wearing this strange little smile, "Ethan's here. And apparently he thinks he's better than the rest of us because he bought a house." For a second, it felt like the world tilted. The cousins laughed, but it was that awkward kind of laugh, like they weren't sure if they were supposed to. I stood there holding a tray of plates, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. Thanks," I said, trying to play it off. But Dad didn't let it slide. He took a long swig of beer and said, loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "Must be nice, playing big shot homeowner while your brother's still struggling. Some of us actually care about family." That one cut deep. I didn't even know what he meant. I'd never once refused to help when they asked. Just last month, I lent Ryan my car for a week when his broke down. I tried to keep my cool, sat down with a paper plate of food, hoping it would all blow over, but Mom wasn't done. She started going on about how unfair it was that I had a house while Ryan was still finding his path. She left out the part where he'd turned down 3 job interviews because retail was beneath him. Then, just as everyone was about to eat, she looked straight at me and said, "You stole your brother's future." It hit me like a slap. I put my fork down, my stomach twisted up. "Excuse me?" I asked. She crossed her arms, like she'd just delivered some grand truth. "You bought that house before Ryan even had a chance. Now the market's impossible. You locked him out. How's he supposed to start a life when you took the opportunity first?" For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. The house I bought was a foreclosure I'd been saving for since I was 17. It had nothing to do with Ryan. But no one said a word. Not Dad. Not my cousins. Not even my drama-loving aunt. Everyone just stared, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't yell or slam anything. I just stood, thanked them for dinner, and left. The drive home felt endless, my chest tight, my jaw locked. That night, I sat alone in my empty living room. Just me, a folding chair, and a couple of boxes, and I couldn't shake the humiliation. I kept hearing her words. Stole his future. Like working for what I had was a crime. Like I owed him something. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Angry at them, but mostly at myself for thinking being the good son would ever be enough. Then came the real shocker. A week later, there was a knock at my door. A process server. I actually laughed, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake, until I saw the envelope. My parents were suing me. The claim? Intentional interference with Ryan's economic prospects. I read it 3 times before it clicked. They were blaming me, legally blaming me, for buying a house before he could. And that's when something inside me hardened. The hurt turned to something cold and sharp. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was war. The lawsuit hit harder than I ever could have imagined. Not just because it was absurd, but because it crossed a line I never thought they'd cross. I always knew they favored Ryan, but I convinced myself it was just the usual younger sibling stuff. The extra dessert, the new sneakers when mine had to last another year. I thought that once we were grown, things would even out. But that lawsuit proved we weren't even playing the same game. The next day, I drove back to my parents' house. Not to fight. I just wanted answers. Mom opened the door like nothing was wrong. "Oh, good. You're here," she said, stepping aside like she was inviting me in for coffee. I held up the envelope. "You sued me." She didn't flinch. "You forced our hand, Ethan. We had no choice." "No choice," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "You're taking me to court because I bought a house with my own money?" Dad appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You knew your brother was planning to move out," Dad said, his tone steady but full of accusation. "You swooped in and grabbed a house before he could, knowing it would crush him." I blinked, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just heard. "What house was Ryan going to buy? He doesn't even have a job," I said. "Not yet," Dad replied, as if that made it all okay. "But we were going to help him with a down payment. You wrecked that plan when you bought in the same neighborhood." I just stared at them, stunned. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You were planning to buy Ryan a house, but now you can't because—" "What? You think there aren't enough houses to go around?" Mom folded her arms across her chest. "It's about fairness, Ethan. You didn't need a house yet. You could have waited. You should have waited. But no, you had to show off." That one actually made me laugh, a dry, bitter sound I couldn't hold back. "Show off? Mom, I didn't even tell you about the place until after I closed. I thought maybe, for once, you'd be proud." She looked at me with this pitying expression, like I was a clueless kid missing the obvious. "We would be proud," she said, "if you ever thought about someone other than yourself." Something inside me cracked then, a quiet but final kind of break. I realized nothing I said would change their minds. They'd already decided I was the bad guy in this story. So, I left before my temper got the better of me. But walking away didn't make anything better. Over the next few weeks, it was like my entire family turned into a PR team for Ryan. My aunt called, telling me to do the right thing and sign the house over since my brother needed it more. My cousin sent me a link to some article about housing inequality with a little thumbs up emoji, like that somehow proved I was hoarding property. Even my grandma, who never got involved in family drama, called late one night to say she was disappointed I'd put myself before family. Meanwhile, Ryan was thriving on the attention. He started posting vague, dramatic stuff online. Things like, "Some people don't care if you drown, as long as they can stay afloat," or "Imagine taking what was meant for someone else." His friends piled on in the comments, painting me as some greedy villain in a story I didn't even sign up for. The worst was the next family dinner. I almost didn't go, but a tiny part of me hoped maybe they'd calm down, that this whole thing would blow over. It didn't. The second I walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Ryan was sitting at the head of the table, Dad's seat, grinning like a king holding court. He saw me and smirked. "Oh look," he said loudly, "the homewrecker's here." I ignored him and took a seat quietly, but Mom wasn't about to let that slide. "You know, Ethan," she said, voice sharp but sweet, "we're giving you a chance to make this right before things get ugly. If you just sell the house and split the profit with your brother, we can drop the lawsuit." I stared at her in disbelief. "Drop the lawsuit?" I repeated. "You actually think I'm going to give up my house, because you decided Ryan deserves it more?" Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You wouldn't have been able to buy that place without everything we taught you. Without the roof over your head while you worked those jobs. You owe us." I had to take a breath before speaking because every part of me wanted to yell. "I paid rent when I lived here," I said. "Remember that? I started giving you money every month when I was 16. You charged me for groceries. I didn't know you then, and I sure as hell don't owe you now." That's when Ryan chimed in, smirking like it was all a big joke. "You've always been jealous," he said. You can't stand that mom and dad love me more. So you try to buy your way into being the favorite. I looked right at him. Ryan, I don't want to be the favorite. I just wanted a home. That's it. You're the one turning this into a competition. He shrugged. If you actually cared about this family, you'd give me a chance to have what you have. That's when it finally clicked. They didn't see me as family anymore. I was just a resource. A wallet with a heartbeat who had the nerve to spend his own money on himself. When I got home that night, there was a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was calm, but cold enough to make my stomach turn. If you don't cooperate, Ethan, we'll have no choice but to escalate. You think this is just a lawsuit, but we can make things very difficult for you. I sat there in my quiet living room, staring at the blank wall, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their son. I felt like their enemy. And that's when the fear melted into something stronger. Determination. If they wanted to fight, they'd get one. I wasn't backing down this time. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped or pushed around. But before I could even figure out my next move, things got worse. Much worse. A few days later, I woke up to a letter from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account using my personal info, my date of birth, my social security number, even my mother's maiden name. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was sabotage. I barely had time to process it before the next blow landed. That afternoon, while I was at work, I got a call from my insurance company asking to confirm that I wanted to cancel my homeowner's policy. My stomach dropped. I hadn't called them. I told them not to cancel anything and asked what happened. They said someone called pretending to be me, gave them my policy number, my address, everything. Even answered my security question correctly. The question? My mother's maiden name. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. This wasn't paranoia. This was an attack. I called the bank, locked down my accounts, and added every security measure they offered. They confirmed there'd been 2 attempts to log in, both from the same IP address. When they gave it to me, I looked it up. It traced back to my parents' internet provider. I felt the walls close in. They weren't just suing me anymore. They were trying to destroy me. And the worst part? They had everything they needed to pull it off. Who else but family would know your first pet's name, the street you grew up on, or the model of your first car? That kind of information wasn't just personal. It was intimate, the kind of stuff you only share with people you trust. I tried, one last time, to believe there had to be another explanation. Maybe it was some bizarre coincidence. Maybe one of Ryan's friends thought this was all some twisted joke. So that evening, I drove over there, clutching the printed email from the bank like evidence in a courtroom. The house was quiet except for the hum of the TV. Mom sat knitting on the couch, Dad in his recliner, and Ryan was stretched out on the love seat with a bowl of chips like he didn't have a care in the world. Did you try to hack into my bank account? I asked, holding up the paper. Dad muted the TV, but didn't look remotely surprised. Watch your tone, son, he said evenly. I'm serious, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you? Because this IP address traces right back here. Ryan smirked, not even pretending to hide it. So? Maybe you should use better passwords. That was all I needed to hear. You did this, I said, turning toward him. You tried to get into my account. He just shrugged, like it was nothing. I just wanted to see how much you had. Thought maybe you had enough to do the right thing and help out. I stared at him, stunned. You don't just break into someone's bank account because you think you deserve their money. That's illegal. Mom set her knitting down, sighing like I was being unreasonable. Don't be dramatic, Ethan. He's your brother. Families share things. Families don't steal from each other. I snapped before I could stop myself. Dad stood up, looming over me like he used to when I was a teenager. Lower your voice. We won't have you disrespecting us in our own home. You're suing me, I said, my voice cracking. You tried to cancel my insurance. You tried to hack my bank account. And you're talking about respect? Mom's face hardened. We had no choice, Ethan. You wouldn't listen. You forced our hand. That was the breaking point. I realized there wasn't a line they wouldn't cross. If they were willing to break the law, wreck my credit, maybe even get me foreclosed on just to teach me a lesson, then there was nothing left to salvage. I walked out without another word. But the next week proved they weren't done. I started getting strange calls from utility companies, asking if I really wanted my water and power shut off. Someone had filed cancellation requests for every service tied to my address. The gas company even sent a technician to confirm a disconnection order. I stopped them just in time. Every day felt like a new disaster waiting to happen. It was exhausting. One night around 3 in the morning, I woke to pounding on my door. The fire department was outside. Someone had reported a gas leak at my house. I stood there half asleep and humiliated while my neighbors peeked through their curtains. That's when I decided to install cameras around the property. I needed proof. And I got it. A week later, a motion alert pinged my phone, and when I checked the footage, there was Ryan. Hoodie pulled up, creeping up to my porch. He bent down, grabbed a for sale sign I'd stuck in the yard just to mess with them, and ripped it right out of the ground. Then, before walking off, he flipped off the camera. He didn't even notice it was recording until too late. The next morning, I printed the footage and drove straight to the police station. I didn't want to take it that far, but this was beyond a family spat. They filed a report and told me to think about getting a restraining order. I hated the idea. It felt so final, but after weeks of being harassed, I didn't have much choice left. The next family dinner invite never came, which was fine by me, but that didn't stop them from showing up anyway. 2 nights later, I was sitting on my couch watching TV when loud banging rattled my door. When I opened it, Mom and Dad were standing there, furious. "Why did you call the police on your brother?" Mom snapped before I could even say hello. "Because he trespassed on my property," I said, keeping my voice calm. Dad's face turned crimson. "You're trying to destroy this family," he said. "You're dragging us through the mud." "You did that yourselves," I shot back, my hands trembling but firm on the doorknob. "You sued me. You hacked me. You tried to shut off my water. I'm done being your villain just because it's convenient." Mom's tone went ice cold. "If you go through with that restraining order, Ethan, you won't have a family left." I looked at her for a long moment and said the only thing left to say. "I don't think I do anymore." Then I shut the door before they could reply, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. And it wasn't just a figure of speech. I really felt that separation. In that moment, I knew I was done trying to win them over. Done being the good, obedient son who kept the peace while they tore me down. But even then, I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go. Because a week later, I got a letter from my employer's HR department. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint accusing me of fraud, embezzlement, and behavior unbecoming of a company representative. I didn't need to guess who had done it. When I read that letter, my stomach dropped like the floor had vanished beneath me. Fraud? Embezzlement? I just sat there staring at the words, hoping they'd rearrange themselves into something else. I'd worked at that company for 3 years. I was the guy who stayed late, picked up extra shifts, helped others meet deadlines. And now, because of an anonymous lie, I was being treated like a criminal. The next day, I had to sit through an excruciating meeting with HR and my manager, combing through every transaction I'd approved in the past year. My palms were slick, my throat dry, even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. But innocence didn't matter. The seed of doubt was planted. They put me on administrative leave, pending investigation, which is just corporate talk for, "We don't trust you until we're sure." I drove home in a fog, barely noticing the road. Losing my job would mean losing my paycheck. And losing my paycheck meant losing my house, the one thing I'd fought my entire life to have. Deep down, I knew that was exactly what my parents wanted, to grind me down until I had nothing left, until I was desperate enough to crawl back and do whatever they said just to survive. The next few weeks blurred together into one long stretch of exhaustion. Every day felt like trudging through wet cement. Heavy, slow, impossible to move without feeling stuck. I spent hours gathering documents for HR, bank statements, pay stubs, emails, anything that might clear my name. And all the while, the lawsuit was still hanging over my head like a storm cloud that refused to break. The court date was closing in, and my lawyer, the cheapest one I could afford, kept warning me that it was going to get ugly. The stress was eating me alive. I barely slept more than a couple of hours a night, waking at 3 in the morning with my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Food didn't appeal to me anymore. I'd stare at my plate and feel nothing. My friends noticed I was pulling away, but what was I supposed to say? My family's suing me and trying to destroy my life doesn't exactly make for small talk. Then came the call that nearly broke me. My mortgage company reached out. Because of the lawsuit and the HR investigation, my credit had taken a hit, and now they were reviewing my loan. They didn't say foreclosure, but I could hear the warning in their voices. If anything else went wrong, I'd lose the one thing I'd worked almost a decade to earn. That night, I sat in the middle of my bare living room floor. No furniture, just unopened boxes and the echo of everything I'd built slipping through my fingers. For the first time in years, I felt truly defeated. I thought about all the nights I'd worked 2 jobs, dragging myself home too tired to do more than collapse on a mattress. The vacations I skipped, the things I sold just to make rent. All those years clawing my way up from nothing, and now it all felt like it could vanish because my family decided I'd stolen what I had earned. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the blank wall, listening to the fridge hum in the silence. Eventually, the anger drained away, replaced by something steadier. Not despair, resolve. Because the truth was, I'd been here before, different circumstances, same feeling. That rock bottom point where you either break apart or build something stronger. I remembered being 16, sitting on the edge of my bed with a backpack full of clothes, realizing my parents weren't going to help me, and that I'd have to figure life out on my own. I remembered that fear, and I remembered surviving it. So that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to sell my house or hand Ryan a cent, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them win. Even if I had to claw through every obstacle they threw at me, I was done being their victim. The first thing I did was hire a real lawyer, a good one. I sold my old car to pay the retainer and picked up a cheap used beater just to get to work. This new attorney didn't treat me like a lost cause. He actually listened, combed through the details, and started building a plan instead of telling me to settle. Then I got serious about protecting myself. I froze my credit, changed every password I had, turned on 2-factor authentication for everything, from my bank account to my Netflix login. I upgraded my camera system, too. This one saved everything to the cloud so no one could tamper with the evidence. I started documenting everything, every call, every letter, every shady attempt to sabotage me. I bought a thick binder and filled it with screenshots, police reports, timestamps, and notes. I even logged the times I saw Ryan or my parents' car drive past my house, just in case. At work, I stayed calm and professional, even as the investigation dragged on. But inside, I was burning. Quietly, I started digging, asking careful questions in HR, trying to find out anything that might link the anonymous complaint to my family. They couldn't tell me much, but one slip gave them away. The caller had mentioned a family feud. That was all I needed to hear. The hardest part was staying quiet. Every part of me wanted to go public, to post the footage, the emails, the proof, and expose what my family really was. But I didn't. Not yet. I kept my head down and kept collecting evidence. Because I knew something they didn't. As much as they'd tried to trap me, they'd left fingerprints all over their mess. And sooner or later, I was going to use those to bury them. But before I could, I had to get through the worst of it. The court date was coming fast, and I knew they wouldn't play fair. I was right. A week before the hearing, a package showed up at my door. Inside was a thick stack of printed screenshots, texts I'd supposedly sent Ryan years ago, cropped and edited to make it look like I was threatening him. And sitting on top, in my mother's perfect handwriting, was a note. Asterisk, this is what happens when you turn your back on family. Asterisk, I just stood there holding it, the paper trembling in my hands. But what I felt wasn't fear this time, it was clarity. I finally saw them for what they really were. My parents weren't just angry or disappointed. They were vindictive. They were willing to torch everything. Me, my job, my reputation, just to stay in control of the story. And for the first time in months, a strange calm settled over me. Because once you realize the other side has no rules, you stop wasting energy trying to be the better person and start focusing on winning. The next morning, I handed the package to my lawyer. He flipped through the pages, eyebrows climbing higher with every sheet. "This is good," he said. I blinked. "Good. It's fake," he explained, tapping one of the screenshots. "See this timestamp? Doesn't line up. And this one, you didn't even have this number back then. This kind of fabrication will make them look terrible in front of a judge." For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. That moment lit a fire in me. I doubled down. I pulled every record I could get, phone logs, bank statements, old emails. I even got a sworn statement from a friend who was with me the night some of those threats were supposedly sent. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. My lawyer gathered everything I'd been collecting and turned it into a clean, devastating little portfolio. Every document, every timestamp, every shred of evidence lined up like dominoes. Around that same time, things at work finally started to shift. HR wrapped up their investigation and completely cleared my name. In fact, they said the anonymous complaint was so baseless and vindictive that they flagged it as workplace harassment and passed it along to legal for follow-up. My manager called me personally to say I could return. Walking back into that office after weeks of forced leave felt surreal. People had clearly heard the rumors. I caught a few sideways glances, the kind of curious looks people give when they want to ask, but don't dare. Still, I kept my head high. My manager surprised me by offering me a new project, something bigger, more ambitious than anything I'd handled before. "You've been through a lot," she said. "But we know who you are and what kind of employee you've always been. We trust you." Those words hit harder than I expected. After months of being treated like the villain, it felt good to be recognized for the person I actually was. I threw myself into that project with everything I had. Stayed late, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And by the end of the quarter, I didn't just meet expectations, I crushed them. When review time came, I got a raise. A big one. And sure, the money felt incredible, but what really mattered was the control it gave me. For so long, I'd been reacting, dodging blows, putting out fires. But now, for the first time in months, I was building again, reclaiming what they'd tried to take from me. I started fixing up the house, too. I unpacked the boxes that had been gathering dust in the living room, hung up the pictures I'd been too drained to deal with, mowed the yard, patched the gate, even planted a small vegetable garden in the back. My house finally stopped feeling like a battleground and started feeling like what it was always meant to be, mine. I even started letting people back into my life. Dinner with friends, a small housewarming party. I laughed again, genuinely, without glancing at my phone every 5 minutes waiting for the next disaster. But healing didn't mean forgiving or forgetting. I was still planning. Quietly, carefully, patiently. I began digging into public records, tax filings, property deeds, anything connected to my parents. And that's when I found something interesting. They weren't as stable as they pretended. 2 years earlier, they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house, and there were liens attached. They were behind on payments. Suddenly, their obsession with my house made perfect, ugly sense. It wasn't just about jealousy, it was desperation. They weren't angry because I had succeeded. They were furious because I'd succeeded while they were sinking. I didn't act on it right away. I tucked that piece of information into my binder alongside the rest of the evidence. If they wanted me to be the villain, fine. I'd be the villain, on my terms. A week before the court date, my lawyer scheduled their deposition. I sat quietly as he questioned them, calm and collected, while Mom tried to maintain her righteous indignation. But it was unraveling. Every time they mentioned Ryan's lost opportunity, my lawyer pointed out, politely but relentlessly, that Ryan had no job, no savings, and no plan to buy a house in the first place. My purchase had no effect on him whatsoever. Then came the moment that changed everything. My lawyer slid the forged screenshots across the table. "Can you confirm these are authentic?" he asked. Mom hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but enough to notice. "Yes," she said finally, chin raised. "Interesting," my lawyer replied, flipping to the next page. "Because our forensic analysis shows these were created on a phone registered to your younger son, Ryan. Would you like to revise your answer?" The silence that followed was almost sweet. For the first time, Mom didn't have a comeback. I'll never forget that look. Half shock, half dawning realization that the tide had turned. Afterward, my lawyer turned to me with a small grin. "They're going to regret ever filing this," he said. I could feel it too. The shift in power. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one playing defense. And as the court date crept closer, something new started rising in me. Not just confidence, something sharper. Righteous anger, maybe. They had humiliated me, sabotaged me, tried to ruin my career, and now they were finally going to face consequences for it. I wasn't just planning to win. I wanted them to think twice before ever coming for me again. The courtroom, the very place they expected to see me crumble, would be where everything changed. By the time the date was set, I was no longer just defending myself. I was preparing to strike back. The deposition had given me a taste of what it felt like to hold the truth like a weapon, and I realized how much power came from simply being prepared. I spent the next few weeks refining my binder until it was ironclad. Every page was labeled, color-coded, and tabbed. Evidence of the hacking attempts, complete with IP logs and a notarized statement from my internet provider confirming the trace. proof of the false insurance cancellations, backed up with call logs, reversal letters, and timestamps. Security footage of Ryan trespassing, 3 angles, perfectly synced, stored on a thumb drive. But the most devastating piece of evidence wasn't about me at all. It came late one night while I was doing more background digging. I stumbled on something in the county records I hadn't seen before. My parents' names were listed on a pending foreclosure notice. At first, I thought it had to be a clerical mistake. I drove to the county clerk's office the next day to be sure, and there it was, plain as day. Their house, the one I'd grown up in, weeks away from being auctioned if they didn't bring the payments current. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Their obsession with my house wasn't about pride or fairness. It was fear. They were losing their own home, their leverage, their image, their favorite line. Asterisk, we put a roof over your head. Asterisk, and they couldn't stand that I'd managed to build something solid while everything they had was slipping away. I sat in my car outside the clerk's office for a long time, the document in my hands, feeling the full weight of the truth settle in. Staring at that notice, I just sat there. A younger version of me might have felt bad and maybe even offered to help, but that guy's gone. They tried to wreck me, tear down everything I'd built, so if they wanted to fight, I was ready to swing back. I called my lawyer that night and laid out what I'd found. Interesting leverage, he said in that calm attorney voice that means he already knows where to stick the knife. If they kept pressing, we could subpoena their financials, and once those foreclosure papers were in the court file, the whole righteous parents routine would fall apart. The timing was perfect, too. HR had fully cleared me and even offered a character letter. My boss said she'd testify if needed that the complaint was nonsense and probably malicious. In short, I had credibility, and they didn't. But I wasn't about to let the hearing be the last word. Quietly, I lined up moves they wouldn't see coming. I met with my bank and got pre-approved for a line of credit. I consulted a real estate attorney, not because I planned to sell, but to be ready if they tried a lien or some last-minute trick. Most importantly, I started talking to family, not to beg or spin a story, but to show the truth. I put the forged texts, the police report from Ryan's trespass, and the HR letter in front of my aunt and watched her face go from smug to stunned. Word traveled fast. Cousins who'd gone cold slid back with cautious messages that basically said, "We don't know what's going on, but we're not picking the wrong side." Ryan, clueless that the tide was turning, kept peacocking online. Cryptic digs about toxic siblings and even a GoFundMe for his housing situation, conveniently skipping the part where he wasn't homeless, just mad he didn't have a free place. The night before the hearing, Mom called with that sugar-dipped tone that always meant trouble. "Ethan, there's still time to do the right thing. Sign over the house. Or at least sell it and give your brother the profit. Let's end this before it gets ugly." I laughed. "Mom, it's already ugly. Tomorrow it's going public." Long pause. Then, "You'll regret this." Maybe once I would have. Not now. The morning of court, I put on my best suit. Nothing flashy, but sharp enough to make a point. I printed 2 extra copies of the foreclosure notice and slid them behind the forged text section in my folder, not because I knew we'd need them, but because I wanted to be ready if my lawyer gave the nod. Walking into that courthouse felt surreal. My parents were already there with Ryan. Mom looked smug, Dad looked furious, and Ryan looked like he was about to hit a jackpot. They didn't realize the game had already changed. I wasn't just defending anymore. I was there to win and to make it stick. Before the judge even called us, the first cracks formed. My lawyer quietly handed their attorney the forensic breakdown on the fake messages, plus a drafted list of counterclaims: harassment, attempted fraud, defamation. Their lawyer went pale. For the first time in months, I felt like the one holding the cards. And I still had an ace. Those financials that could shatter their image in front of everyone. I wouldn't use it unless I had to, but if they pushed, I was ready. The room was hushed, paper shuffles, a cough from the back row. I sat straight with my folder lined up square, and for once I wasn't nauseous or shaking or second-guessing. The judge called the case. We all stood. They took the plaintiff's table, and I sat with my attorney at defense. Mom shot me that old kitchen floor glare from when I tracked in mud. This time it bounced right off. Their lawyer started into a polished speech about family duty and unfair economic sabotage, painting me as the selfish older brother who timed a purchase to block his siblings' chance at independence. The judge's eyebrows climbed. "Counselor," she said slowly, "you're telling me this case is about buying a house first? He rambled about intent and equitable relief. I could already see the frustration building. The judge didn't look impressed. Then our side stood up. My lawyer, calm as a surgeon, took their story apart seam by seam. He submitted bank statements showing years of savings, pay stubs from the 2 jobs I worked through high school, and records that I paid rent while living at my parents' place. This purchase, he said, tapping the closing packet, was the product of nearly a decade of work. There is no evidence my client interfered with anyone's ability to buy anything. In fact, the supposed injured party has no employment, no pre-approval, and no savings to support a purchase at all. This suit isn't just baseless, it's malicious. Then came the best part, the exhibits we'd been saving for exactly this moment. First up was the security footage. The video played on the monitor for the courtroom to see, showing Ryan skulking up my porch, ripping the for sale sign out of my yard, and flipping off the camera. His face went crimson. The room fell dead silent except for a sharp gasp from the back. My aunt, probably. Then came the forged screenshots. My lawyer passed them to the judge with the forensic analysis attached. As you can see, Your Honor, he said evenly, these were fabricated to portray my client as hostile and threatening. They were created on the plaintiff's own device. The judge's expression hardened as she turned to Ryan. Is this true? She asked. He stammered something about memes and jokes, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. The judge entered the documents as evidence of bad faith. And then my lawyer went in for the kill. He slid one last folder across the table. Your Honor, he said, his tone calm but precise. We'd also like to submit these public records showing the plaintiffs are currently in default on their mortgage and facing foreclosure. We believe this establishes motive for their actions. The effect was instant. Mom's face drained of color. Dad leaned back, his jaw tight. Ryan blinked, clearly blindsided. The judge flipped through the papers, then looked up at their attorney. Counselor, is this accurate? She asked. Their lawyer hesitated, then finally nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge let out a sigh and set the file down. In light of this information, I am dismissing this case with prejudice. That meant they couldn't come back and try again. Relief washed through me, but more than that, control. For the first time in months, I had it back. Still, we weren't walking away quietly. As we gathered our things, my lawyer turned to their side and said, perfectly polite, we'll be filing counterclaims for harassment, attempted fraud, and defamation. My client has suffered substantial financial and emotional damage because of your actions. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but Dad stopped her with a hand on her arm, his expression dark and defeated. Outside, on the courthouse steps, I finally turned to them. You wanted to take everything from me, I said quietly. You wanted me broken. Instead, you lost. And everyone saw it. Next time you think about coming after me, remember how this ended. Then I walked away. I sat in my car for a while, just breathing. After months of feeling like I was drowning, I could finally take a full breath again. But I wasn't done. If they thought court was the end of this, they were wrong. I called my lawyer as soon as I got home. Let's move forward with the counterclaim, I said. He sounded pleased. I was hoping you'd say that. Filing those claims felt like crossing a finish line I'd been crawling toward for months. This time, I wasn't reacting, I was leading. We filed for harassment, defamation, and attempted fraud, backed by every scrap of evidence we'd gathered. The forged texts, IP logs, video footage, HR letters, everything. A week later, their response came, and it was almost funny. Suddenly, the same people who dragged me into court were writing careful, lawyer-approved letters asking to resolve this privately within the family. My lawyer smiled when he read it. They're scared, he said, and they should be. When mediation finally came, I walked into the conference room calm and steady. My parents looked wrecked. Mom pale, Dad hollow-eyed, and Ryan. No smirk this time, just fidgeting with his hoodie zipper like a nervous kid. The mediator laid it all out. The claims, the potential penalties, the fact that Ryan's fake messages alone could lead to criminal charges if we wanted to press them. The hacking attempt? Already on record with the police. We could have easily taken it to the district attorney. Mom tried one last time. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling, you're really going to drag your own family through this? I met her eyes. Were my parents? I asked. You dragged me through it first. You don't get to play the victims now. In the end, they didn't have a choice. They settled. The terms were clear: no future claims, a written apology, legally binding, and full restitution for my legal fees and damages. When I signed those papers, it felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. Word got around fast. The same relatives who'd whispered about me months ago were now texting apologies. "We didn't know it was that bad," they said. My aunt, the one who'd called to guilt-trip me, even showed up with a pie and an awkward smile. As for my parents, the foreclosure went through not long after. They'd been too busy trying to destroy me to save their own home. Ryan moved into a dingy apartment on the edge of town. Last I heard, he was still job hunting. I didn't go to the auction. I didn't need to. A few weeks after everything was officially over, I hosted a small housewarming. Nothing fancy, just some friends, a few cousins who'd stayed neutral, laughter spilling out of the kitchen. As the sun dipped below the fence line, I stepped out into my backyard and looked at the little garden I'd planted months before. It had flourished, green, alive, peaceful, a quiet symbol of everything I'd fought for. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "All we ever wanted was for you to be part of this family," it said. "Mom." I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "I was part of this family, until you decided I wasn't." Then I set my phone down, turned back to my guests, and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said. They cheered, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the silence. No shouting, no slamming doors, no one telling me what I owed. Just peace. And it hit me that, in a twisted way, my parents had given me the best gift of all. Not their approval, not their help, but the freedom to stop trying to earn either. The war was over, and I had won.